Hi, I'm Clara.
And I'm Stephanie.
And this is the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into philosophy and all things yoga related, which has been my passion for the last 20 years. In this week's episode, we interview Susanne Mueller, fellow yoga teacher and holistic nutritionist. Steph, what was your favorite thing that we talked about?
The subtle ways we nourish ourselves.
Susanne, you?
For me, it's always the emotional connection to ourselves and how we eat.
And I would say for me, my favorite thing that we talked about is our experience in our bodies versus what we see or the reflection we get back from the world. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast.
Hi, welcome everyone to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're sitting with Stephanie.
And Clara.
And today we're interviewing Susanne Mueller of Undrgrnd Yoga. Thanks for joining us today, Susanne.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here.
So we usually open by asking our guests 3 semi-random questions just for our listeners to get to know you. And you can pass on any of them if you're like, I don't want to answer this. Your favorite season to prepare meals?
Fall.
And why is that?
Because I feel like it's more cozy with the rain, especially here where we live. And I like squash and warm foods. Having said that, I actually really like preparing food in the summer too. But I think because we're coming into fall now, it's like it's really inviting to come into the kitchen again. Mm-hmm.
What are 3 self-care practices you indulge with your family?
Good one. Oh, I think of self-care more for myself. With my family, self-care practices. So you mean with everybody, or what I do for myself to keep me?
I mean more what you do as like with your daughters or with your husband or the whole unit together that keeps you all connected and feeling nourished.
Good. One thing that I really like to do with everyone is before we eat is talk about one thing that we're grateful for or something that was really exciting about their day that day. So some kind of communication about that. And I feel like that's a really binding experience. And what else? I think going outside and going for walks or bike rides is also one that helps just to kind of make us all feel good and happy. And right now, especially because it's getting darker earlier, I would say like family reading time before bed. And we're kind of all in our bed and reading a book together. And right now, that just feels really good.
Love it. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it really is so nice.
Do you guys read the same book? Are you reading one book together or everybody reads their individual books?
We're all reading one book. So usually Sam... Well, right now it's Amelia Bedelia.
Amelia Bedelia is so good.
I know. I used to read her books too. I remember her as different. I don't know if her character has changed. I remember her as different than what she is now, but they're fun for me to read and the girls love them too. So so that's what we're reading collectively.
Cool. Last question. If your body could talk, what would its message be right now?
Take a deep breath and relax.
Love it.
I'm in.
Yeah.
So we brought Susanne on today for our weekly talk. This week's theme is around the body and resurfacing the wisdom of the body. So this is part of our 30-day yoga challenge, Feed Your Whole Self series. And Susanne is a yoga teacher and a holistic nutritionist living here in Vancouver, BC, and originally from Switzerland.
Well, actually, my parents are from Switzerland. Yeah. So
that
they
makes
got
so
married.
Much sense.
Why?
Sorry. You have a Swiss feel.
Oh, yeah. I think you're probably right. Because so basically my parents are born and raised in Switzerland. They got married. My dad wanted to farm. My mom's like, okay. So it was a lot easier for them, or I would probably say cheaper for them to move to Canada and buy land here. So while I was raised in Canada, I definitely have a strong Swiss foundation. And I feel like it is really in my bones in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm.
And do you feel that in terms of like with being in nature or with the foods you eat? Like, how do you kind of live in your heritage? Like, what are the things that you do that you feel that embodiment?
Yeah. So one thing, as many people did during COVID, was I started to bake bread again. And my mom was like every Saturday, she was famous for her bread. And her mom would have made bread, and it was like something that was just every mom did that. Most moms did that in Switzerland. So whenever I come back to that and I'm like, the dough is rising or I'm kneading the dough, I'm like, that for me is so nourishing, and I feel so connected to my background or my ancestry, I would say. Feels really good.
Baking bread is like such an evocative practice. Just like the smells and the textures. There's so many things.
Yeah. And it's a
Eating
time,
it's really
especially
good too.
sourdough. Eating it was my problem for a long time. That's maybe what started these issues. But no, eating it is like the most comforting thing for me. Yeah. In terms of food, yeah.
So I actually, Susanne, I've pulled some quotes off your website that I wanted to read to give listeners a little bit of insight and background as to where you came from. And I was hoping that you would speak to your story around the quotes that I've pulled and why you're choosing to share these pieces of yourself and what it's done in developing your practice and what you offer for people. Okay?
Great. Mm-hmm.
So here's the first one. Farm life had a formula. Show up, work hard, get results. Being a sensitive soul, it was really clear to me that emotions weren't very useful in the world. Sensitivity didn't get shit done. It got in the way.
It still makes me emotional to hear that, right? Because that's kind of the foundation of the world I was brought into. And while it was amazing in so many ways, like every child should grow up on a farm. The difficult thing for me was that I was more sensitive and emotional than what I think my parents could understand, and what the world of the farm life needed in a way. And so in farm life, like you said, the formula is like, my dad, I grew up on a dairy farm, so it was like every morning at 5:30, he's up and in the barn. There's like no breaks. And every night at 5:30 you're in the barn. And then during the day, you do the work that needs to be done. So it's all work focused. So it makes sense that when is there time to go deep into your self, really? And granted that a lot of that is done through doing this work, right? It's a different kind of processing. But the way that I think it was, I didn't see where I fit in that way. So I thought, okay, this is not okay. This part of me that's like kind of sensitive and expressive, it's not that welcomed, even though I was, but so that was kind of the start, I think, of my dissociation from myself. That makes sense? Mm-hmm.
And so what happened as a result?
So that disassociation, I think, carried through. So I learned that my body is not safe, and what happens in here isn't meant to be out there. And it still happened. I was still expressive, but this is what I was subconsciously picking up on. And so from there, I would say it more escalated or came to, what do I want to say? More of a situation when I got a little bit older, and I would say probably around like grade 7, grade 8 was when it started to show up in food. So in my relationship with food and my body. So already I felt my body wasn't okay. And then, all the images that we get in the world of what we should look like and who we should be. And that starts to pile up. And then it's just like, okay, I don't feel okay. I don't look okay. And I think the anxiety of that, plus all the anxiety I had, kind of escalated. I needed an outlet. I needed something to kind of like cope or cave in a way. Yeah. And that would happen a lot through crying, and it would happen a lot through food.
Mm-hmm. So what did that look like?
Okay. Yeah, so
it's okay.
It started to look like in the beginning. So the other funny thing is, so I had 4 siblings, right? So we kind of grew up in this environment where even though we had plenty of food, if food was on the table, like get to it or else someone else is going to take it. And so we had this thing with the chips. Like if we were watching TV and my mom brought out a bag of chips, it's like, oh my God, this is awesome. And that bag of chips would be gone in like a minute, I swear. So I noticed that it started happening with chips. And if for some reason most people are out of the house, then I would go kind of to the chip cupboard, and I realized it was almost uncontrollable. I was almost not even me, but it was just like, I just needed to eat it. And so it comforted me in some way. And so I think that's where it started. Mm-hmm. That's where that pattern started, yeah.
I can relate to that because I have 3 siblings, and ours was the pantry, and my mom and my parents would keep like candies. And it was the exact same thing. And I can relate to coming from a big family. Food gets put on the table and you're like, I want a piece of this before it's gone. It's that scarcity complex.
Exactly, yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll read the second quote because I think it goes to the second part of your story. I think it adds to your story, I should say. As I continued practicing yoga, I noticed that my eating patterns softened. I felt calmer, and I began to make choices that felt better around food and with life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I started doing when I realized like this isn't really okay what was happening, or I felt like what I was doing around food, because it changed in different ways too, but I felt like, hey, I need to control this. This needs to stop. Like, this isn't okay. I don't want to be doing this anymore. But I found that never worked. Like any kind of willpower, or, I'm never going to binge eat anymore. It just doesn't feel good. But then the next stressor would come or something would show up and I wouldn't know how to deal with it. And then it would still kind of be my fallback. So that's when I started practicing yoga at one stage. And as I kept doing it, I was actually very consistent in the practice because I noticed how much better I started to feel. Yeah. And as soon as I started to feel better and more comfortable, it takes time obviously, but I also started to notice this just direct side effect that I wasn't doing that as much anymore. I didn't need food as much anymore. There was more space there. And I just was like, okay, that's really interesting. I just found that really interesting. And so it's funny, this course is called Feed Your Whole Self. And initially I kind of moved away from it, but my work was called Feed Yourself because I started to realize that it wasn't, we might go to food or think food is the problem in whatever patterns are, but really it's the lack of kind of taking care of our whole self, and then naturally we'll try to fill that in other ways.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And how I feel like, at least for me in my relationship to food, especially when I was an emotional eater, is how there's a void in one part of our life. But instead of trying to work with the void there, we try to fill it up in a different part. And food, I feel like for a lot of us is like an easy way to feel comforted, because it's almost like instant gratification, right? We eat it and then there's a physical change, there's an emotional and mental change from it. So it's so interesting that the void is like, at least for me, was an emotional void or an emptiness that I was feeling, and I would eat something in order to fill that emotional void. Yeah. So, yeah.
And the cool thing is that that's actually a pretty intelligent, smart response, right? We're feeling something. Food is meant to nourish us and nurture us. And right from the beginning of our lives, we cry as a baby, we're comforted with milk. And so we were designed to like seek pleasure, avoid pain. So these what's so important to remember is, if that's happening, is that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just a sign that, okay, there's something, maybe something here to look at. What part of myself am I feeding?
Yeah.
So, Susanne, talk a little bit about in the work you do with clients around food psychology and like a movement practice. What are some of the things that you would go over? Like, what are some of the things you bring forward from your own story, and then also ways to heal and work with this?
Yeah, so it's so individual. And this is why I find, there's these programs out there, and especially weight loss, everything like companies out there, and it's kind of like a one size fits all approach. And this is what you should do, and then you'll get this result. And it's just doesn't see the whole picture. And so even if I sit with somebody, this person is so unique, and their challenge is so unique, and it's so individual. It's just like, it's so much of it is just initially gathering information. And so I went through the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, and it was very food focused, and it was excellent course, but I still came out wanting to work with people differently. Like I knew like creating meal plan, I would like fall asleep creating it. It was so boring to me. And I also felt like it's just not what people need. They don't need someone else to create this form, like this meal plan of what they should eat. They're probably not going to do it anyways, so anyways, long story short, it was pretty clear to me kind of right away that I needed to work with people on like I call it like just a deeper level, and to understand more parts to the puzzle. And so over time, I started still to work with people in this way. And it was kind of, I would say, a bit intuitive, but also from my experience. And then I thought, well, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. I have to be careful with how I'm working with people. Yes. And then I landed on this course, and it was it's from the Institute of the Psychology of Eating, and it was online. And that was like the missing piece to this puzzle. And it gave me the confidence and the support to be like, yes, go there with people, ask them about these things, because if you don't, they're never gonna get to where they want to go.
Can I ask that, like, when you first, like, just in terms of like, what are the first questions that you generally ask people?
One of the first two, I would say two things. And let's say if we're going into a session together, which is usually like a package of sessions, I'm like, okay, if you could wave your magic wand, what do you want to come from this experience? As in, where do you hope to be afterwards? And usually by their answer, it can be very clear in what they're looking for. Yes. And that can help to give a lot of guidance in our direction. And the other question, I'm drawing a blank right now. The other question, I'm drawing a blank, but usually it comes towards, okay, how do you want to feel? Yeah. And what is it you're actually, on that level, what you're looking for? Yeah. Which is always so interesting, because people think I have to get to a certain place and then I'll feel a certain way. Yes. But it's when we start to have the conversation of, well, you can feel that way now. Let's start there. Mm-hmm. And then once we kind of start to get ourselves in that state, our physical body will respond to that. Yes. And so,
It just makes me think of one of the coolest things that I learned through like mindful practices and yoga and such, and changing the way that I eat is that, and I remember an acupuncturist telling me this, is like, your body wants to innately heal itself. Like that's its job, right? Part of it is not only to keep it alive, but it also wants to run at its most efficient, best. Yeah. So if you start to make decisions to propel yourself in that direction, your body, like you said, will naturally start to do it, because it innately wants that. But I feel like sometimes our mind is like in the way. So I love that you're bringing in, like the mindful piece of it, not just like eat greens and don't eat gluten or whatever, whatever the trend is at the moment. But instead, like, how do you want to feel? And so I feel like that's a great question to always start with. And just kind of offering it to our listeners is like, how do you feel right now? And how do you want to feel? because then all the decisions, not even just food, but like what we expose ourselves to, like what we pay attention to every day, all of that can kind of, we start to decide, like you said, where we want to go, then, you know, our mind and our body will naturally be like, okay, like start, you know, I'm kind of motioning, like propelling ourselves in that direction. And so, and another part of that, I think, is like making a decision of what it is that you want. Because that's another part that I feel like, at least for me, was like, I never thought about it. Like you said, like we're bombarded with what we're supposed to look and feel like, you know, from the media and people around us, that sometimes you don't stop to think like, what do I want, you know, as a being, right? And so, and like you said, food is just one aspect of the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's just such, in a way, it's such a small piece. And sometimes I laugh with clients because we go through a whole session and we didn't even talk about food, right? And it's like, well, we're just we're kind of taught to believe that food or our body is the problem. And like you're saying, Claire, it's like most people think that my body is wrong. I'm not okay. I'm not safe in my body. My body is the enemy. Food is the enemy. And so a lot of people kind of walking around with this mentality, and that's where I was at too. And to come to begin to see that our bodies aren't against us. They want to do everything that it can for us. And when we provide the state in our mind and in our body for like peace, let's say, and providing that in different ways, then our body, like I said, responds to that right away. And so much of this work is, so I say, you know, listening to your body, and people are like, what does that mean? Or, you know, embodying, it's hard for people to grasp that because we've been taught to live in our head. So that's when we start to go into like just body feedback. Any subtle feedback is feedback. So sometimes people think, oh, listening to your body means I have to go into my heart and what's in my heart, and that's part of it. But it might just be, oh, the way I'm sitting is uncomfortable and my body's letting me know that. Right?
Yeah.
I have a kink in my neck. That is our body being so clear to us what it needs. But we're like, oh, okay, pop a pill or just crack the neck and move on. It's not like, okay, how can we honor our body a little bit more? Because it's
learn
not
from
against us.
Yeah. And like that makes me think, the other thing that I think is so interesting is that when we feel generally something very intense in our body, it's like, what I've heard from a lot of healers is like, that's your body's last call to be like, pay attention, you know. First it's like subtle things that arise, and if we're not paying attention to the subtle, then it gets more and more like louder and louder until it's like beep 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 beep, hello, you know. And so I think that that's also an interesting one, and that's like the gift of mindful practices, is that we start to be able to hopefully hear the more and more subtle cues, not only from our mind, but specifically I feel like from our body. Like, you know, we talked about this with Erin, you know, like the body never lies. So if you ever want real information, get down there. And by down there, I mean take the elevator downstairs from the mind into the body. Right? And kind of observe how, is my neck, you know, what's happening with my back, or you know.
So this goes nicely into the koshas, just in terms of speaking of all the ways that we listen to our bodies and our emotions and coming out of the mind. So the koshas being the 5 sheets or layers of the body. So I thought Clara could speak to what the koshas are, the elements involved, and where it comes from.
Great. So the koshas is from Indian philosophy, and specifically from Vedantic philosophy, which is a little bit younger than classical yoga philosophy. And so the koshas are known, they usually translate as the sheaths or the layers. And they're layers of ourselves going from the most gross to the most subtle. And so the grossest one is your Annamaya kosha, which is your physical body. And it deals with all the things that literally we take in and feel and eat. Okay. And then the next kosha, right? So the layer just below that is your pranamaya kosha, your energetic body. And so that deals with, like in TCM, the meridians, and Ayurveda, the nadis. So they're the energy lines that live in our body. And then the next layer, going deeper in terms of subtlety, is the Manomaya kosha, mono being manas, mind. So that is your mind and your emotions. It's like who we think we are, the id, the I. And then the next layer to that is your Vijnana Maya kosha or Vijnana Maya kosha, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And that is your wisdom body. And then the last layer, which is what I would consider your soul, is your Anandamaya kosha, which is your bliss body. And so specifically in Vedantic yoga, they think of the practice as dealing with all the layers, and you don't necessarily have to penetrate them to get to the bliss body, but all of them, working with all of them, helps to essentially kind of, I think of it as remove. You think of, some people describe the koshas as like think of a lampshade, and the light bulb is your Anandamaya kosha, and then the shade around it is all of these koshas. And how I think of it is like scarves on top of the kosha. So the scarves on top of the kosha doesn't allow for the light to shine as brightly. Like if you ever put a scarf over a lampshade, you'll notice it changes the color in the room. And so for me, the koshas are all the scarves on top of the lampshade. And so we're gently kind of moving them off, or taking them off, layers of Maya, of illusion, to kind of connect to the Anandamaya kosha. And we're not trying to necessarily get rid of them. We're just trying to remove kind of like the gunk that could be holding them, or kind of making you stuck in that specific layer.
And so the ways, like moving through each of the koshas, no, that's brilliant, is so the first layer would be the movement practice, so yoga or any form of physical movement, and then the food we eat, so very tactile. And then they get more subtle as you work inwards, so through breath work, through visualization, your intuition, whatever have you, right?
Yes. And then there's one layer that generally we are more preoccupied with than other layers. And there's no hierarchy in terms of the layers, but like for some of us, like those of us who practice hatha yoga, the physical practice, we generally are very connected to our Annamaya kosha, our physical body. And that can be a gateway into our practice, right? Where for some people it's meditation. So meditation would be more like the Manomaya kosha, working with the mind. Makes sense? Yeah.
So I had a few more questions that I'd like both of you to speak on. And again, you can pass if you're like, we covered this, or I don't want to answer. So the first one being, what's one of the lessons your body has taught you? Can you think of a time when you've been injured or ill, and this can be physically or emotionally, when the message had to get so loud for you to finally hear it?
The first thought that comes to my mind is because anxiety was something that's really a theme that's carried through my life. And the time that it kind of just went for it, it was like, this is not working. Just like you're saying, I didn't take care of myself through the subtle cues. And it was when I was living in Toronto, and I moved there because it was just like, that's where you go to, be successful and wear the power suits and get the job, and you keep going that way. And then, which I didn't do, I worked at a restaurant for most of it, but I thought that's where I should be. And so all this struggle of everything just kind of escalated there. And that's where I started to have, and probably only then experience like real panic attacks, which I hadn't had in the past. So that was my body being like, just like stop or listen, or this isn't you. And
what did you do? Is that when you moved to Vancouver?
No, you know what? From there, that's actually when I went to Costa Rica, and that's when a friend told me about an organic farm down there, and I went there, and that's when I started doing yoga. So that was my first class. So that was like the start of this journey.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Clara?
The one that I think of two, but the one that shows up for me as you say that is the kink in my neck. So I get this kink in my neck when I'm overworked and I need to take a break, and I love working. So it happens often, and it generally happens on the second or third day of a training. I'll like turn around really quickly, and then, so then for like 2 days I have to kind of not move my head. Like my neck and my head are attached to each other. I can't move my head left or right. And so that is generally a cue that, and so it's chronic. Like as much work as I do on it, and as much, physical and whatever, but I like it. I actually like it now because it's a great indication that I'm like, cool, okay, tonight I need to like lie down. I have like I have some exercises that I do that get rid of the feeling, but it means I need to chill out and do less and delegate more, which is like really hard for me. So that I would say is one of the biggest things, and it shows up and continues to show up in my life. So Steph, you?
I think the biggest one recently was breaking my wrist, just because I was going in so many different directions, and it was a freak accident on my bike, but it forced me to slow down. Like I couldn't do anything. But I could type. The way the break was, I had my fingers. So I was like, okay, cool. More writing, more like stationary activities. And my life has changed a lot since. So I'm grateful for all the lessons that came out of that.
Yeah, and that's the way to think about, I feel like personally, to think about these large signs is if you take them, if you think of them as a propeller for change, then it can be hopefully something amazing, and like a lot of people say that, like when there is a big change in their life, like a big dramatic something, we have the choice to now literally shift gears to move in a different direction.
Okay, my next question, in terms of body awareness and expression, what do you hope to impart on or teach your daughters?
Look at me, I'm already getting so uncomfortable because it's just like, how do you raise a daughter to, both, boys and girls, but to be their true self through their lives? And I guess that's just not a reality, or if they're just always going to come head to head with that. But say the question one more time.
So essentially, in terms of body awareness and how your daughters learn to express themselves, what do you hope to teach them?
I hope to teach them, or I do teach them, that their body is amazing and that all parts of their body is amazing. And we talk about all parts of our body. Isn't that cool how your legs help you to run? Isn't it cool that you can move your body? How can you move your body? Show me, so just a sense of being not even told, but experienced that their body is really cool and not something that's wrong or bad.
Love it. Clara?
I think kind of along similar lines, but like to think of their body as a celebration, or to think of her body as a celebration and a way to feel and to be in joy in it. I remember one of my friends saying to me ages ago, like, you love being in your body. And I do. And why I love that is I love moving. And like you said, like I still am like, whoa, like I move my hand and like, look how my hand move, like, and you can embody things around you. You can be inspired by the world around you and move it through your body, like you can shape shift through your body. And I think that that's so cool. So I hope that we impart that onto Carmen, as well as the joy of dance. Like we do a lot of dancing as a family. And I hope that she gets into it for that, because I feel like it's such a beautiful way to celebrate and to connect, in a way that is that, at least for me, there's so much freedom. I feel very blessed for that. Like I feel a lot of freedom in my body. So I hope that I impart that on her as well, because especially as a woman. I
just want to say to that exactly, that we have to remember that our kids are they're listening to us, sure, but way more than that, they're watching us.
Yeah.
And that's what they're going to internalize and see. So we can tell them everything we want, but until they see us doing that, it will only go so far, so yeah.
It's interesting that you're commenting on the process of sight, because my next question has to do with something Clara said before one of our podcast episodes. I'm going to paraphrase, but the essential of it was, I don't want to go look in the mirror. I'd rather feel embodied. And I love that statement. I've held on to it. So my question is around this idea of sensation, being in the feeling versus seeing yourself, the difference. Because I think, at least for me, one of the reasons I start negating how I feel is because I start seeing how things should look. And I'm like, oh, I don't look like that, in terms of like my breast size or waist size or what have you. So this is a more open-ended question, just in terms of, how do the appearance of things hinder or help how you feel in your body?
Great question. I'll just jump in there first, in that I've never enjoyed looking in the mirror. And the reason being is that I find it very distracting. And I feel like it's always taken me out of my experience. And I've always felt that what I feel and am experiencing when I see it is not the same. And it used to really upset me. And what I'm thinking of specifically is I studied dance for a long time, but I didn't dance to be a professional dancer. I danced because I love moving, and I was able to like spend 8 hours a day in school dancing. I was like, yeah, okay, I'm in on this. And at the end of every semester, you learn choreography, they record you, and then you have to sit with them and give yourself, and they give you feedback. And I would remember that, like, when we were doing the choreography, how I felt and how free I felt. And then I would look at the video, and what I would see was very different from what I felt. And like my dance teacher would always say, like, girl, you got all heart, no technique, but all heart. I loved her. She's very, very honest. But that was fine. Like, I realized that was fine for me because I wasn't there for technique. I was there for heart, But I remember being like the first year of dance school, like I would cry afterwards because how I felt and what I saw were two different things. And then I got over it. I was like, screw it. Like, it doesn't actually, for me, matter, because I'm not trying to be on stage. I'm trying to dance my heart out, and that's what I was doing. And so, and I still comes to this day, like, I preferred yoga studios that don't have mirrors in them, because I don't want to see what I look like. I want to feel it, but it did take me a while to like let go of the image of what I thought it should look like.
Yeah. So Claire, you spoke to the having a mirror in a yoga studio, and I always thought to myself, if there was a mirror in the first yoga class that I did, I would have never gone back. And it's so true, because I think it would have been way too confronting it was already confronting in a lot of ways, because I felt so awkward. But then having to watch me feel that, it just wouldn't have been good. So I often think, I think, whenever I walk into a yoga studio and there's mirrors in there, I think, how many people didn't come back just because they didn't want to look at themselves practice? And for me too, it's not, what kept me in yoga isn't how it looked or how it, maybe there was a challenge there for me too, but at the same time, it was because it helped me to feel good. Yeah. And to get into that state, you can't see that from the outside. Like you're saying, it's all about the feeling that it brought for me. And so. Mm-hmm.
Great. So final question. How are you treating your body right now? Or what is a treatment that you've done in the past that you would share with our listeners? And I can start, because
Go for it.
I have a really good one. A friend reminded me this weekend of Abhyanga. So the practice of heating up sesame oil and then rubbing it all over your body. And it stimulates the the lymph system. Is that right, Clara? Because we did it
Yes.
in my teacher training with you and Carolyn. So it's a detoxifier, and it soothes the muscles and boosts the circulation. It's great. It's kind of messy. So if you're doing it, like, go in your bathtub with your jar of hot warm sesame oil. Yeah, not hot. Yeah, warm sesame oil.
Or it depends on in terms of your dosha, in terms of your constitution, which oil you would use, and also the time of year that you'd be doing it. But it also lubricates the joints. It's another big one for lubricating of the joints. It literally pulls toxins out of your skin, the many layers of your skin. And so just to kind of give a little background on that, just in case our listeners want to try it, and definitely I would Google it also, but like a quarter to a half a cup of oil that you would warm. So I usually recommend, like, you get a big bowl and then pour hot water into it, and then take a jar of oil and put the jar inside of the bowl to warm it up. And we want to warm it. We don't want it to get too hot. And then you essentially would start, you either start from your heart and you start circles at all your joints and on your chest, and then you go up your arms and up your legs, essentially drawing all the energy towards your heart to kind of release and stimulate the lymphatic system. And you would put so much oil on, this is what Steph's saying, on, like, imagine that you were going to be wrestling, like it's like that much kind of oil. You want to have like a thick layer of it, and then you want to ideally do a bit of movement with the oil on. And what it'll do in like 15 or 20 minutes, it'll start to pull the toxins out. And then the next part of that is you want to either take a towel and take the top layer of oil off, or get into your shower and just let it rinse off. Don't use soap. You don't want to wash it off, but you want to take off the first layer, which is generally the layer that feels toxic, like not toxic. It'll like, one of the big side effects, at least for me, is I always feel nauseous from doing it, and that's like just part of the detoxifying aspects of it. If you are pregnant though, or you're on your moon, it's not recommended, just PS, but definitely check it out. And this is a great time of year to do Abhyanga, like as we're shifting seasons like this, and especially if you're high vata, if you're high air, this is a great way to help ground and get you back into your body. Thanks for listening. I just felt like I should share that with everybody, but I highly recommend Abhyanga. Good one. Susanne, what are you doing these days?
I would say, so I've been getting up early again. It's always depends on how the girls sleep, obviously, but I'm getting up early again. But I would say my practice is just very slow. I laugh sometimes because I'm just doing like hip circles for like 10 minutes. you know, but it's just like all I want to do. So, and then at the same time, then I'm like, even if I don't feel like it, I dance to a song, because sometimes, as you know, both know, yoga can be very angular and that can feel good, but sometimes I just want to like do that. And what pose really offers that, right? So it's just like, I just put on a very whatever song and then do that. I obviously always feel good afterwards. So yeah.
Shake it out. I love it.
Yeah. I am not doing very much these days because it's just new mom time. So the biggest thing that I think I'm doing for myself is I generally try to sleep with her on her first nap, or she sleeps. I take a nap. I feel like napping and eating is the two things that I'm doing right now in my own practice that's allowing me to continue on. So and generally I'm very, very conscious of my diet, and I found that with breastfeeding I have to actually eat a lot of things I wouldn't generally be eating, and being okay, because I need the fat, I need the carbs, I need all of it to continue to make lots of milk for my little one. So I think that eating often and sleeping is my practice right now. And I just keep saying, this is temporary, this is the place that we're in, and I will be coming back to other ways of doing self-care. Brushing my teeth is another big one. That's another.
There's also nothing wrong with naps and snacks. I can get down with that any day.
I love
I still nap. Yeah, having kids taught me how to nap, and I'm a great napper.
Okay,
it's the best.
Yeah. And even if just lying down and not even sleeping, but just lying down, it's been really good for my nervous system. Thank you so much for joining us, Susanne. It's really, really been a pleasure having you.
And
thank you.
Susanne is one of the people who are donating a prize for the people who complete our 30-day yoga challenge. So Susanne, I was hoping you could talk about the hour consultation just briefly and what you'll receive.
Yeah. So usually when I work with people, it's more than one session, but in one session, we kind of do as much as we can in a short amount of time, where we talk about what's the person looking for, what are they hoping to get even just out of that session, and then we kind of cater the session to that. So if they want to talk about food, we can talk about food. If they want to talk about their emotions and feelings around food, when eating, or their patterns, we go into that. If they want to talk about their belief about how they look, we look into that too. So it will really be catered to what they truly most want from that session.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you, Steph. And we'll, if you want more information on Susanne and all the amazing things that she's doing, there'll definitely be links in all of the write-ups, so you can also check her out there. And those of us who are doing the 30-day challenge, I hope your challenge is going well. And we'll see you next week. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully have you on again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast was brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.